One of the major contributions that I appreciated from your theorizing about gender and gender in sports as you applied it, and it's somewhat unique but somewhat similar to some other gender scholars, is this focus on different levels of how gender operates. In language I think you frequently use is structure, cultural, and interactionist level. How did you come to that framework? And do you think it's still a good organizing framework, or have you kind of moved on to a different way of envisioning how gender is kind of structured, taught, and realized?
I still use it. I still think it's useful. It might be just, you know, my old brain stuck in its own groove there, but I guess, you know, for some of you, many of you maybe don't know this, that, you know, the one piece that I think I developed, you know, really using this framework was one that was based on just a chance observation of a bunch of kids, 4- and 5-year-olds at a youth soccer opening ceremony. And I ended up writing this piece called Barbie Girls versus Sea Monsters. And it was, it became an exercise for me to try to think about a moment in social life using these 3 levels of analysis. How can sort of an interactionist level analysis of sort of in the gender field, they call it doing gender, but it's really more a symbolic interactionist roots. The sort of everyday interactions, how gender is constructed. And then within a more of a structured context, in this case, the structure of gender structure of youth sports, and then an analysis of cultural symbols, and then the case I was looking at was how the sort of gendering of team names, and then the incendiary appearance of a very large Barbie doll at this opening ceremony, and how it ignited these kids to sort of form these gender boundaries. And so I used that observation as a way to think about how those 3 levels of analysis, what each of them reveal to us, and how they might be used together, and how just using one of them or 2 of them, you might miss something. But if you can bring all 3 of them in together, structure, using Connell's ideas of gender regimes as sort of dynamic structures, and how interactions are shaped by those structures, and how cultural symbols are brought into play in these everyday interactions as well. And I guess it's probably not only me who finds that useful, because I've had so many people come up to me, say at professional meetings, and say, oh, I used that article in my intro class. I introduce students to theory with that, because it's a familiar story, or a familiar theme for a lot of kids that they've experienced being out there at those sort of ceremonies, and they've been on youth sports teams at age 4 and 5. They've seen girls and boys chasing each other and creating gender boundaries, and I drew a lot from Barry Thorne's foundational work on gender play and children in schools. So then again, you know, there's been a lot of work in sociology. My former colleague Sharon Hayes, who had written some really interesting stuff on structure and culture, and makes a strong argument that it doesn't make sense to divide theoretically structure and culture. And so I know there are different ways for people to configure their thinking on this. That the other level of analysis, that even when I wrote that article and submitted it to a journal, one of the reviewers wrote back and said, what about gender at the level of the individual? And was pushing me to incorporate feminist psychoanalytic theory, because, you know, which I have used in some of my other work, because the reader said to me, I don't know, this anonymous reader, you know, but the reader said to me, I don't think you can really understand the excitement and revulsion that's described in your story without, you know, reading into the sort of ambivalence that people have deeply ingrained in them about gender and gender difference. And I took that point, and I think I might have thrown it into a footnote, but it didn't make sense for me to just from a public observation really be able to make any claims about individual commitments or revulsion towards masculinity or femininity or anything. All I was able to observe there was group dynamics, and then kind of pull back and look at the structure. So I guess, I would say a fourth level of analysis that looks more at the individual in some cases, in some contexts, would make a lot of sense to add to those other three.
Yeah, it reminds me, and I associate that framework largely with Barbara Isman's ideas of gender structural